You're watching The Legal Breakdown. Glenn, we may very well have Judge Cannon back in the news right now. The Trump administration and Trump's co-defendants in the already dismissed classified documents case are now appealing back to her. Can you explain what just happened here?
So, Brian, what just happened is Trump appointed Judge Aileen Cannon, who is no longer presiding over the classified documents case in Florida and therefore has no jurisdiction and no authority to act in the classified documents case, just acted in the classified documents case, issued a temporary injunction ordering Attorney General Merrick Garland not to release special counsel Jack Smith's report about the crimes of Donald Trump and others. Brian, just when I thought I lost the capacity to be surprised at anything Judge Cannon did, remember, she has twice been reversed, smacked down in a figurative sense by the 11th Circuit Court of Appeals when she twice abused her judicial discretion and did a favor for Donald Trump that the law does not allow. And now it looks like she's gone and done it again. Remember, the issue that's up on appeal right now is potentially her third abuse of discretion because she dismissed Donald Trump's unlawful retention of classified documents, obstruction of justice, espionage case. Dismissed the case against Donald Trump and his two co-conspirators, Walt Nauta and Carlos de Oliveira. That dismissal has been appealed. Now, the appeal only involves the other two co-defendants, Nauta and de Oliveira, because remember, Jack Smith's special counsel dismissed the classified documents against Donald Trump outright because he has this, immunity while he is sitting president. That case can be revived potentially in the future. So it's only the two other co-defendants whose cases are up on appeal. But here is a bedrock principle of the practice of criminal law, particularly in the appeals arena. Once a case is appealed, the trial court judge loses jurisdiction, loses the authority to act in the case. The case is no longer hers. And defendants Nauta and de Oliveira filed an emergency request for an injunction anyway, even though she no longer is presiding over the case. Only the 11th Circuit Court of Appeals has the authority at this point. And they said, look, we want you to order the Attorney General not to release Jack Smith's special counsel report. Presumably they did that because their cases might again be revived if the Court of Appeals overturns Judge Cannon's dismissal of the cases, and now Nauta and de Oliveira could find themselves going to trial sometime in the future. And not surprisingly, maybe they don't want information to come out about them. That could be remedied with some redactions to special counsel Jack Smith's report. But as far as I know, and when I read this very scant slightly over two-page order by Judge Cannon, I was looking for her to put some authority, some precedent in there saying, and this is why I have jurisdiction. This is why I have the authority to act in a case over which I no longer preside. I don't believe she does. And she puts absolutely no basis in this two-page ruling that sets out her jurisdiction, her lawful authority. Undeterred, just as she has been in the past when she was desperate to do favors for Donald Trump, she said, I'm issuing this temporary injunction, and we'll see what the 11th Circuit Court of Appeals has to say about it, because Nauta and de Oliveira also filed for the same temporary injunction in the 11th Circuit Court of Appeals, asking that either they issue the temporary injunction prohibiting Merrick Garland from releasing the report, or that they kick the case back down to Judge Cannon, remand it to Judge Cannon, such that she will then again have jurisdiction and have the authority to take up this issue, which, as best I can tell right now, she doesn't have the authority to do. She did it anyway.
What do you think the likelihood? I mean, look, we've spoken at length about the extent to which Merrick Garland is looking to disprove any optics of politicization. So what do you think the likelihood of him actually deferring to Trump is, especially given the fact that Trump won the election, and so he might feel some institutional duty to be deferential, more so deferential to Donald Trump than he would have been had he not won the election.
You know, Brian, predicting how the rule of law might play out or might fail us again, whether it comes to Donald Trump and his incoming administration or Merrick Garland and Joe Biden's outgoing administration, predicting those things is a bit of a fool's errand. Let me be foolish for just a minute and say that, Merrick Garland has publicly pledged previously that he would release the special counsel's report. That's kind of the default position. Remember when Bob Mueller, special counsel in the Trump-Russia investigation, authored that 2-volume report? That was released, even though it was heavily redacted. Ultimately, some of those redactions were lifted. But so the expectation is that Merrick Garland will order the release. Here's another challenge. Let's assume that the 11th Circuit Court of Appeals does send the case back to Judge Cannon just so she can make this decision. There's also a bit of a separation of powers challenge. What do I mean by that? Well, the Department of Justice has regulations that says special counsel will author a report, will forward it to the Attorney General, and the Attorney General will have the discretion whether to release it publicly or not. I'm not so sure that's what we call a justiciable issue, an issue that the courts even have a right to take up, because that is the executive branch doing exclusively what their procedures, rules, and regulations allow them to do. And I'm not entirely sure that the court could weigh in and put a stop to it, although, as I say, I wouldn't put it past Judge Cannon.
So the Trump team is appealing to Judge Cannon to try and do their bidding by blocking the release of the report. Why do they have such a vested interest in trying to prevent this report from being released anyway? It's not like we don't know what happened down in Florida with Trump's theft of classified documents. It's not like we don't know how Walt Nauta and Carlos de Oliveira were participating in this whole scheme. And so why the sudden interest in making sure that this report ultimately isn't released?
I have to believe, just as we learned so much from the release of the Trump-Russia report, even though there had been any number of criminal cases that had been ongoing, not against Donald Trump, but against some of his criminal associates, I suspect we're going to learn a whole lot more in what will be a much more inclusive rendition of the facts, of the evidence, and of the crimes of Donald Trump. Now, remember, Brian, we have seen a good bit of what Jack Smith found by way of his grand jury investigation of the crimes of Donald Trump. Why? Because they culminated in indictments, and those indictments were filed publicly, as all indictments are. So we got to read for ourselves, not only in those indictments, but in some subsequent pleadings and filings from Jack Smith as he went about trying to litigate, for example, the presidential immunity issue. However, I have a feeling what we have learned thus far from those public court filings will probably pale in comparison to what we are about to learn once the special counsel's report is released, assuming it's released.
Glenn, I know this is a bit of a reductive question and probably an ignorant question, but what right does the incoming Trump administration have to block a report that was funded by taxpayer dollars that would show a crime against the United States? Like, don't we have every vested interest in being able to see what that report uncovered, because the taxpayers actually funded the whole thing and there was a basis to bring the charges against him?
Yeah, well, there you go, making sense, Brian. So here's the thing. First of all, the president-elect's future administration has no right to block what this administration is lawfully authorized to do up until Donald Trump takes the oath of office on January 20th. So they really don't have a lawful right. Some might say they don't even have standing at this point. But let me tell you, here's what I find to be one of the stronger arguments in favor of not releasing the report. I don't believe it's a winning argument. But remember, we talked about how Judge Cannon dismissed the case against all three defendants, Trump, Nauta, and de Oliveira. Well, technically, the Nauta and de Oliveira case, the dismissal, is up on appeal. The Trump dismissal is not up on appeal because Jack Smith already dismissed the case against one of the three co-conspirators, Donald Trump. But the other two, de Oliveira and Nauta, in the event the 11th Circuit Court of Appeals reverses Judge Cannon's dismissal, and I suspect they will, and send it back to the trial court to get it back on the trial track. De Oliveira and Nauta could very well argue at this moment, listen, if you release the report now, it could interfere in our client's ability to get a fair trial in the event the case is put back on the trial track. That's an argument that courts and judges are often amenable to. So I think that's perhaps the best piece of the argument for why at least the information about Nauta and De Oliveira perhaps shouldn't be released, be redacted from the report. But that serves as no basis for all of the information about Donald Trump and others being released in connection with both cases, the classified documents, obstruction of justice espionage case down in Florida, and the attempt to overturn the 2020 election case up in D.C.
And let's finish off with this. I know that January 10th is an important date here. What's going to happen on that date?
So January 10th is in play for multiple reasons for Donald Trump at this moment. But in connection with this matter, it's because Merrick Garland said, listen, he hasn't made a decision about whether he will release the report, and he doesn't expect to make one until at the earliest January 10th. So as our viewers undoubtedly will remember, that January 10th also coincides with the date on which Donald Trump is supposed to be sentenced on his 34 felony guilty verdicts up in New York. So could be a very busy day for Donald Trump.
Well, we will stay on top of this. Of course, all eyes are going to be on Merrick Garland to determine whether or not he allows this report to be released. I certainly hope that he does opt to do what's right here and not defer again to the optics of politicization by preventing this report from being released. But we'll have an answer here in the next couple of days. So for those watching, if you want to follow along, please make sure to subscribe. The links to both of our channels are right here on the screen. I'm Brian Tyler Cohen.
And I'm Glenn Kirshner.
You're watching The Legal Breakdown.